Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Tuesday the 17th of August 2021 and I've just got some thoughts on what's going on and what we're sort of planning to do, and just sharing our thoughts at this time of psychological warfare, isn't it? That's what this is. Just in case you still think something has changed, it hasn't. So what's been going on over the last couple of years with this new religion on the block, the new ideology, this is a function of all the other things that have been done to us and which we acquiesced with over the last 100 years, really, including feminism, all the rest of it. The whole agenda, the sodomite agenda, all the rest of it. What's going on now wouldn't have been possible if people had not sort of rolled over for that. So they'll roll over for this as well. It's demoralization. It's a process. It's a military process of demoralization, of demoralizing a culture and genetics, religious feeling, social cohesion. They know how to do this. This is a military thing. And if you're alive now, you've been living through it all of your life, and probably your parents were living through it. And this is not something which is only happening in the West. This has been happening across the whole world for a very long time. Been pushed by the so-called British Empire and replaced by the American Empire, and under the aegis of democracy and all the rest of it. You will have noticed, I'm sure, that when the Americans have been pushing what they call democracy, none of the countries that they were so eager to free did they export to any of those countries their own constitution and Bill of Rights. No. Democracy is something completely different. Democracy is a sort of chameleon, really. It's just a technical term for becoming a fully on board member of the New World Order. So now everyone's on board with that, and we are where we are. So anyway, all that to say, if you don't know me or my work is to do with the Qur'an as a complete revelation, not as intoned by the traditionalist, this sort of dagger wielding madmen, or even the modern, the modernist sort of westernizing and westernized Muslim. I don't actually accept either of those camps. The Qur'an doesn't really comport with either of those positions. One is really just kind of pushing a medieval syncretic mixture of religious and cultural narratives, and the other one is, I think, it's trying to ride two horses at the same time, or actually more than two horses, and it doesn't really succeed in that. My position has been that either the Qur'an is from God and preserved and correct, or it isn't. If it is, then that has certain implications, and if it isn't, that has a whole lot of other implications. Let's go and do something else. My own background was that I have a Christian background. I mean, I consider myself culturally a Christian. In fact, culturally Church of England, as it happens, because that's my culture. That's what I grew up in. But my first experience in religion was with what's called Christianity, or I don't know that Christ would have recognized much of it, but that was my experience. And I think once you've been bitten by one cult and one religion, you just learn to see they're all kind of the same. And what we're living through now, it is a cult. But you will have cult members in your family that you can't talk to. This is one of the things that cults do. They basically divide you along a fracture line of whether you're in or out of the cult. It doesn't matter whether it's what they're doing now with this. I call it an accounting procedure, which is what it really is. If you're not on board with it, literally they're going to stop you from seeing your family, but also families will stop talking to each other, and there's this sort of dividing line. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're in the Moonies or the branch Davidians or the branch Covidians. It's always the same. It's the same system. It's how it always works. So my first experience of this was in Christianity. So when I came to the Qur'an and I was looking for answers, I still couldn't work out the grace versus works thing. I got an answer to that very quickly with the Qur'an, and I was listening, because I spent 5 years trying to work that out within Christianity, which isn't possible. They still can't work it out. But then I met the religion, and I'd seen it before. I mean, once you've seen one, you've kind of seen them all. This is why I recommend to everybody to adopt a cult. It doesn't matter which one, and learn all about it. I recently read a couple of books about L. Ron Hubbard of the Scientologists. Fascinating character, really, really was. Anyway, you should learn about one at least. Choose one that you know nothing about and just learn it. I learned about the Mormons, and I learned the Mormons' foundational mythos, which is actually great. And I did that because I used to stop Mormons in the street and start talking to them about religion. So I thought I better ginny up on this. And it appealed to me stopping Mormons and sort of challenging them to talk about religion. But Mormons, sweet as some of them are, they haven't got anything except feelings, and feelings aren't enough. You know, you actually want some facts. So anyway, that's that. I would, if you want to understand what's going on now to you, then understand how all cults work. So that's just a piece of just general advice and something that I've learned from my own mistakes. Now, where I came to with the Qur'an was realizing that not only does it not comport with at all this religion that has latterly kind of attached itself to it, a bit like you've seen Alien, I can't remember, but that bit where the lead character, she has this thing attach itself to her face and wraps itself around its neck. Well, this is Islam vis-a-vis the Qur'an, and this is quite obvious to me, not because I got anything, I'm sort of gunning for Muslims or I want to create a whole load of problems for myself. I'd just seen it before. I'd seen it in Christianity, so I recognised the traits. The use of language, the use of very particular kinds of language. Brother Said Mirza has made a very good video, and I'll link to that down below, about use of certain nomenclature. People saying inshallah and all of this, mashallah, just dropping all these Arabic terms into what they're doing is they're virtue signaling. They're virtue signaling membership of a group. Christians do it too. Praise the Lord, all things work together for good, and whatever it is. There's a whole new nomenclature. I'm sure you will have noticed things like the new normal. It always happens. Every cult has exactly the same kind of basic structure to it. So, as I say, once you've seen one, you will recognize the next one, because there isn't an awful lot new under the sun. Now, before I get on to what I was going to talk about, one of the things I noticed when I first read the Qur'an, and I really, if you don't know me, I have a literature background. For my sins, I went to a British university, but despite that, I can still use my brain just a little bit. And when I first read the Qur'an, I looked at it, I realized, this has got archetypes in it. When you read, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ كَافِرُوا الْكَافِرُونَ, all these types of personality, I thought, these are archetypes. They just repeat. And then you've got, Pharaoh and various other types. They just repeat and repeat and repeat. And there are only a certain amount of people you're ever going to meet. And by the time you're about 40, you've met them all of them, pretty much. I mean, unless you've been just playing on your iPad all the time. But if you've actually been interacting with human beings, by the time you get to about 40, you will have met everybody. More or less all the types, they just repeat after that. And the Qur'an has all of these types, and I realized, well, that's the case. So you're going to find the people who they pretend to believe but they don't really believe. The people, they talk the religious talk, but what they do is just completely different. And you get those who genuinely do believe, those who are sincere, and the Qur'an deals with all of these types. So I found that very interesting. I also realized that this book is a recipe book. It's a recipe book. It's got a recipe in it. I talk quite often about Victoria sponge cake. It was because I went to a British comprehensive school where I learned absolutely nothing. And we had a lesson, this is in the old days, called home economics, which was really to teach women, girls, how to be wives and mothers. Now, obviously, they don't want that anymore. But when I went, it was a sort of transition time where they started, boys only ever used to do woodwork and metalwork, like learning to be men, learning to do actual man stuff. And when I went, which was in the 1970s, I think there was this sort of crossover. It was pre-total insanity. I'm not talking about, if you've been to school in the last 5 or 10 years, you've been exposed to just mind-boggling insanity. It was before that. It was the lead up to that. In sort of environmental terms, it was when they were telling you to put cladding in your loft, That whole environmental thing just began. That was the first Joe Public got. In the 1970s, you would have been watching the TV and there'll be something saying you should insulate your loft. Now, 35, 40 years down the line, they can basically, well, if you live in Canada and places like that, they're tax the rainwater. You're not allowed to collect rainwater. They start small and they build up. So when I was at school, they were just starting with the kind of the crossover between the sexes. So I went to home economics and I learned how to make, well, I don't know how to make it now, but I did make a not very successful Victoria sponge cake. And a Victoria sponge cake, as I remember, there's certain very basic things that go into it. And if you put it into the oven, if you do those things to it and then put it in the oven at a certain heat and then take it out at a certain time later on, what you will get will look like or be quite like Victoria sponge cake. That's what I realized when I was reading the Qur'an. I thought, this is a recipe book. It's a template. It's a template for overthrowing tyranny, which is very useful given the time that we're living in. Now, I realized this a long time ago. I've always known that we were living through a tyranny. I realized before. I'm not saying I'm clever. I just it was obvious to me, and I'm just able to notice these things, as there are lots of people. And I just noticed, all of my life. I noticed it when I was 5. I was listening to my mother talk. I just thought, this is nonsense. These kind of, I'm not just saying her, but a whole generation of baby boomers, selfish, solipsistic, delusional, denying, the kufr, the kind of covering over, the denial of objective reality, objective truth. And I saw it everywhere. I saw it at home, and then I saw it at school. And I remember growing up thinking, one day I'm going to get an answer. One day somebody's going to... I went to school, I was genuinely curious. And in fact, the primary school I went to was fantastic. It was just 2 teachers. And I learned everything that I needed to learn, really. I should have left school at 9. I'd got everything that they could give me. After that, it was just really just mind control and brainwashing and a complete waste of time. But I was very, very blessed that my primary school, those between about 5 and 9, was fantastic. That's all I needed. After that, just read books. But going back to the Qur'an, I realized that this thing it's got a template. It's got a recipe for overthrowing tyranny. And I could see that what we were living through is what I used to call soft tyranny, and up until really about 2.5 years ago. And now we're living through hard tyranny, isn't it obvious? It was more obvious to me because I'd spent an awful lot of time in Russia. I went to Russia first, I think, in 1990, 1991, which was basically like going back in time. It was like going back to the end of the Second World War. The Second World War with kind of gangland shootings and Windows 95. It was a really weird kind of combination of things, but basically economically it was just like the Second World War had just finished, and being in a situation where people had seen their entire civilization and mind control system collapse was fascinating. It was like all bets were off. You could have really, really, really interesting conversations in this country. Can't have them anymore now because people have got mortgages and watch televisions. They will be, not all, but largely been standardized. So the interesting parts of the parts that were interesting about dealing with Russians, 30 years ago, in just 30 years, they've been turned into, shopping fodder. I'm not saying they were all geniuses or anything then, but they had questions. You couldn't walk down the street without somebody kind of attacking you to have a philosophical conversation. In taxis, everyone wanted to talk. Everyone wanted to talk. Not anymore. They were listening to their iPhones or whatever it is. So, what happened for me was seeing, societies definitely can collapse. Then living through a couple of economic collapses in this country, you realize how fragile the whole thing is. And then going back to every few years to the United Kingdom, where it was like dealing with Teletubbies. It was scary dumb, scary indoctrinated, and basically they couldn't care less about anything else. They just couldn't care. They just thought, I got my life, I'm happy, I couldn't care. What I realized that, this system is collapsing. It's been designed to collapse. You can't carry on debasing the culture, the genes, the economy, every single thing. It's going to collapse. They're taking it to collapse. That's what they're doing. And you try to talk to people, just don't want to know. Okay, fine. Well, now they're moving to the next stage quite clearly. And in 2 years, just 2 years, we have an open tyranny in all these countries which used to call themselves democratic. I mean, obviously, my definition of democracy and what they call democracy are very different things. All that to say that, yes, I was somewhat a bit ahead of the curve as it comes to what's coming down the pike, but it doesn't mean that, I mean, a lot of people were, an awful lot of people were, and there were all kinds of, actually going back in internet years, a lot of really good sources. It was the Wild West of internet years, and so you could get that kind of information, not so much anymore. But where that all led to was pretty much was the same answer, the same false answer. And the answer was when enough people wake up. They kind of, it never ceases to amaze me how the ruling elite, who quite obviously comprise 0.000 whatever it is 1% of the entire population, have managed to train the entire population to believe that their opinion matters, and that when enough of these, like, people with no power and quite often no kind of processing ability, when these people wake up, that they're going to overthrow the system and things are going to be better. This is totally delusional. And not only is it delusional, not only do I personally disagree with it and find it quite irritating, because I get it over and over and over and over again. We have this idea in Russian of called наступать на одни и те же грабли. It means to keep stepping on the same rake. You step, a garden rake lying there in the grass, you step on it, smacks you in the face. Step on it again, smacks you in the face. Well, this is when enough people wake up. It's just 7 billion people stepping on a rake and it's smacking them in the face. Well, I don't have any confidence in other people's ability to do anything, and that's not based on, it's based on experience. I see how people really are, and what they are is selfish and stupid. And I'm selfish and stupid too. Give me a choice. I'd rather be selfish and stupid. We all would. But anyway, having read this book, and having been very selfish and very stupid quite a lot of my life, I realised, A, I am going to die, and B, I don't really want to get there having not done my duty. So despite my kind of inbuilt and sort of manicured and nurtured predispositions to selfishness and stupidity, I decided that I was going to force myself to do something other than just continue being selfish and stupid. I mean, I have bouts of both, but primarily, I kind of commit to myself to this other idea. Now, what is this other idea? Well, this other idea, if you know my work, you already know what I'm going to say. But if you don't know my work, what it is this recipe in the Qur'an for overthrowing tyranny. It's got nothing whatsoever, either to do with what I call brand Islam, but nor has it got anything to do with when enough people wake up. When enough people wake up, it's an irrelevance. The power dynamic in the Quranic presentation is between a ruling elite. It doesn't matter who we're talking about, the people of Noah, the people of Hud, the people of Salih, the people of Pharaoh. It doesn't matter who it is. There's a ruling elite, and then there's the masses. And in my analysis, the ruling elite, this is, I'm not going to get into the details of it here, but this is really what the Qur'an means by jinn. If you want the details, you can find it on Qur'anite.com. If you go to either of the books, you'll see that there's an appendix section with 3 articles in it. One is to do with ṣalāt and zakāt. One is the solution to the mysterious letters. And the other one is to do with the matter of jinn. I'm not going to go through it all now, but I have been through it with a fine-tooth comb. And basically, humanity falls into 2 categories, al-ins and al-jinn. Al-ins, you, me, anybody, okay? This is just common people. And then there's the ruling elite. Now, the Qur'an does not say there shouldn't be a ruling elite. Nowhere does it say this is a bad idea. What it does say is that firstly, people are basically a function of their ruling elite. Pharaoh swayed his people and they followed him. This is how it always works. So what you're seeing now, what you're living through now, is a function. It's a function of what the ruling elite want. All those people's opinions that you hear, they're just echoes. It's just a big echo chamber. It doesn't mean anything. Very few people, I wouldn't think, probably 1 in 100 people have actually reached their opinions themselves. What they've been through is a process of fine-tuning osmosis indoctrination into feelings. That's why if you look now on the news, so-called news website, there's feelings. So-and-so's feelings. So-and-so was emotional. So-and-so outraged. That's what they've got. That's what they got. They don't actually have any intellect. They just have these feelings, and that's why they like democracy, because they can control your feelings. They can make you kind of vote for the next set of oppressions that's coming in. Anyway, all that to say, I realise that there's this mechanism which is directed fundamentally at the ruling elites. I'm not interested in the masses because they are a function of the ruling elite. They certainly were Quranically, and I don't see that anything has particularly changed. And actually, I don't even have a problem with it. My problem, if you want to call it a problem, is that the ruling elite are miscreant and evil. It's not that they exist. Of course, they exist. Every iceberg has a visible part. Every mountain has a peak. It's just natural. It's just the physics of power. It's just how it works. So my argument isn't that there shouldn't be an elite. My argument is that the elite have gone off the reservation of their social contract with those whom they rule, and they do rule. And if you can't see that now, then please switch over to the Disney Channel, because I think you're going to enjoy that more. When I went through this, I realized there's a recipe. All of these messengers, they did a certain thing. They went through kind of like a checklist of things. And I analyzed that ad nauseum, and you can read that for free in my PDF. You can get the PDF, the God Protocol, which you can get from Qur'anite.com. And in that, what I've done is basically distill this method, identify what the crucial parts of this method are, identified that all the messengers did all of those things, shown that Muhammad did all of those things in his time, and shown that Muhammad was also the messenger to mankind altogether, and that Muhammad could only be the messenger of mankind altogether when mankind is all together. Well, mankind is all together right now. We have the same language, fundamentally is English, the same economic system, the same pharmaceutical system, the same education system, the same cultural system, the same entertainment system. Show me one thing that we're different on. We don't have any differences. We have regional kind of like color, but that's it. It's one community. It's a worldwide community. And I also demonstrate in that there's one little piece that was missing from Muhammad's mission to mankind altogether, which he couldn't deliver, and he couldn't deliver it. Why? Because he did not belong to this one world community. And I show what that piece is, and then I provide that piece, and I have delivered that to a visible portion of the ruling elite today. As far as I'm concerned, I've done my work. I'm not interested in brand Islam. I'm not interested in, trying to save, this or that or the other. My interest is political, fundamentally political, and if you want to call it spiritual, but mainly political. I'm doing my duty, and that's what I've done. So that's the background to all of this. Now I'm going to get to kind of where we are now. I think for a lot of people watching this, but for us too. What the media will have you believe is that the worst that can possibly happen to you is death. Well, I don't believe that's true. I think the worst that can possibly happen to you is failing in your duty in this life and going to hell forever. That's what I would say is the worst thing that can possibly happen to you. But what they want you to do is they want you to feel that your life, your life, you, Joe Blow, me, whoever, Sam Games, whatever, that my life, your life, our life is so important that we continue to shop and kind of manicure ourselves ad infinitum. That's the great goal, but it isn't the great goal. The great goal is not to stay alive as long as possible, consume as much as possible, and to die of a Pringles overdose staring into the abyss of a plasma screen. At least not from where I'm standing. It's also not to believe lies, and that's what we're being told. We're being fed lies. Almost everything that we're taught at school is either effectively or actively either useless or not true. And thank God we had the internet years, the kind of the open internet years. They're definitely receding now, but it was possible to get some really good information over that time and see where we'd been lied to. Our system is entirely idolatrous. It's entirely idolatrous. What we're being schooled in is the idea of basically worshipping what I call scientism. And science, real science, is wonderful. It's a methodology. It's a method where you can demonstrate and prove something to be usually not to be the case, and then you can increase knowledge on this basis. But that isn't what we have now. What we have now is a replacement theology. It's a replacement theology for the old pre-so-called Enlightenment. Well, this is the so-called Enlightenment theology. It's believed. It has to be believed because you can't question it. There are whole sections you can't question. I mean, I'm not going to go into it now, but it's an ideology. And really what we're seeing now is people complying with ideology. They have no idea what's happening to them, but I can see what's happening to them, and I don't want it to happen to me, and I certainly don't want it to happen to my family. And it's quite clear that they don't hide it. If you look at the big foundations, people with all the money, they're openly into population reduction. I mentioned this to one of my brothers quite recently, and he's no fool. He's an intelligent guy. Oh, it doesn't mean anything. People say things, but they don't do them. These people don't. These are multi-billionaires, and when they say something, they do it. They're not just playing with words because it makes them feel good. So if you wanted to reduce the population, how would you do it? Especially given that computers and robots can effectively do everything that can be done by compliance and no imagination and obedience. So if you wanted to get rid of all the compliant, obedient people with no imagination, how would you do it? I mean, really, well, anyway, I'll leave that there because that's not really the focus of this channel. Anyway, moving on. Where we are now, in my view, is the key term for me is flee to God. That's your only, for me anyway, certainly when I've been doing the work prior to delivering on the God protocol. I had an active focus, but now that work is done. I'm still going to be doing YouTube videos, at least for a while, and this and that. But really, my focus is coming away from physically surviving, although obviously it's natural to want to physically survive. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to reach God in the right condition. Everyone is going there anyway. All these people now with their, you see them on television, you can see they've got absolutely no gravitas. They've got nothing about them because they've sold themselves. Tony Blair, and he's sort of on the fringes now, but all that time he was around, and all these politicians, that they don't really have any power. You can see that they go to the big bankers once a month or whatever it is, and they're basically told what to do, and they look like running boys, errand boys, because that's what they are. And all these people in American politics now, and I'm not here playing party politics, but it's quite clear. And you look at these, what you're the best of what the American people can provide. Of course not. It's a show. It's insultingly bad, but it's meant to kind of get you engaged in it. I'm not engaged in it. I don't care about it. I'm fleeing to God in myself. You've got to start with that, because this time that we're living in is incredibly difficult. It was difficult before. I don't know what it's like where you are, but I live in Russia. Now, Russia was really, really difficult before the government was actively trying to kill you and your children. It was difficult before that, but now it's like a lot more difficult. And so it's very difficult to plan within this. What do you do? Do you plan for mass evacuations? Do you plan for this? Do you plan for that? There is no amount of planning that you can do that can cover every single eventuality. It used to be that money was the problem. But I don't know what it's like, but imagining, let's say you had $10 million, I don't think that would change the existential problem. In fact, perhaps it never had. Perhaps it never did. But at least it gave you some sort of buffer. There's no buffer now. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've got. The only buffer now is fleeing to God. That's the only way you can do it. Because if they're going to come for you, we're all going to the zinger, right? We're all going to what I call the zinger. You know, I grew up in the 1970s. In the butcher's shop, there used to be this kind of, I can't remember, either a strip or like a circle of fluorescent light, and the flies would be flying around. But eventually, they would go into this thing and go, zzz, that'd be the end of that fly. That's the zinger. Well, we're all going to the zinger, including all the people, all the mid-wit kind of bureaucrats who are members of particular organizations who are pushing this through because they believe that they're going to have a place on the ark. You know, they believe that they're going to be safe. Well, we shall see. They plan and God plans, and God is the best of planners. But in my view, there is not only is there no complying your way out of this, there's no preparing your way out of it. I mean, prepare if you can, great, fantastic. But putting your faith in that isn't the solution. The Qur'an says, and in him do the believers place their trust. That's the way round it works. And this is the testing time. It's easy to put your faith in God when, you know, you're living in a mansion and with a moat and, you know, everything's, you know, you're provided for. But what about in a situation where whatever you think you've got can be cut off like that? And I said this months ago. I said they'll cut the internet off. How much money you got then when the banking system goes down? Nothing, right? I mean, most people, you, me, everybody, nothing. So who are you going to flee to then? What they want is they want you to flee to them. They want you to flee to the government. And government, as I'm sure everyone knows, I mean, govern means to rule, and it meant where we get the word mentality from. It means ruling the mind. It means mind control. That's what it is. If you were to explain to like somebody who'd never been to Earth before what government is, how would you explain it to them? Is it the buildings? Is it the laws? No, it's a form of psychosis. But this form of psychosis has been leveraged to the point where it's a total tyranny. And it's a tyranny because through compassion, they're using the language of compassion. It's all very feminized. It's all very passive aggressive. It wants to love you to death. And if you refuse, it's going to kill you anyway. In England, they used to have what under Matthew the Witchfinder, I think, not only, but including witch hunts. I think it was on James I, could be wrong there. Anyway, the way this worked was you had what was called a ducking stool, and you'd find the accused witch and put her on a ducking stool and strap her in, you see, and then throw her in the river. And if she sunk and drowned and died, she was innocent. And if she floated, she was guilty and then burnt as a witch. Well, this is pretty much where we are now with this new accounting system. You can't win. You can't disprove. You can't prove that you don't have it. Even if you if you bend over for all of their invasive gene therapies, you can still get it. I literally saw. It's hard to parody this, but I saw a headline recently. It was a chap who'd believed the government, poor soul, and he's dead now from the injection, and the heading was that he died from this, but it could have been worse. This isn't. How do you parody this? And if you're living in a world where this makes sense, it could have been worse. It could have been worse. I mean, from their materialistic point of view, it couldn't possibly be worse. The guy's dead, but it could have been worse. This is the insanity we're living in. You're never going to get any kind of like confirmation from the majority. You're never going to get any confirmation from the system. It's just going to get madder and madder and madder. And if you're young, you're at a bit of a disadvantage because you grew up in it. But if you're old like me, I'm 54, right? I've seen enough madness. I've seen the trajectory of madness. When I grew up, just being a sodomite or deciding you were going to kind of turn into a cross-dressing gerbil on a Thursday. This was. I mean, I suppose you could have done it, but you kind of had to keep it quiet. But now you have to celebrate it. You see, so this is how you're being kind of controlled. Anyway, all that to say is, except that this is a war. This is a war. It is actually a war. You're living in a war. It doesn't look like a war yet. Well, I mean, it looks like a war if you're in Afghanistan or in Syria and places like that. But this is a war, and accept it. The people you're living around, they are basically casualties. They're what they call kind of like human collateral. They're all collateral damage. They're already dead. The people you see walking around with their telephones, and that's That's it. They're gone. They're already gone. It's just a matter of time before they get kind of stuck into the body bags. This is your war. Accept it as a war. It'll give you like a second breath. It's something boxers talk about. The worst thing is trying to kind of think your way through the whole thing, because you can't. There's no way. Well, anyway, I can't do it. And, you know, I've really tried. But what I could do was short circuit their system by means of the Quranic recipe. And again, you know, if you've listened this long into this talk and you don't know who I am and you don't know my work, you can get it for free and read the God Protocol. Just read the first 3 or 4 pages and see if you don't think it's worth carrying on with. Because this mechanism works, and it's already been delivered. There's no way back out of this. I couldn't turn it around if I wanted to. It's nothing to do with me. I didn't write the Qur'an. All I did was apply myself to its contents and not get bogged down in either brand Islam or the endless talking shops of, you know, so-called free-thinking, you know, Muslims. And that's all I did. It wasn't anything amazing. But this thing has been delivered now. And what I get for my money is, if we do get dragged into some cleansing camp for the unclean, the unwashed, I know that I did my work, and I know that after this point, from the Quran's point of view, the punishments of God become binding. I can't, absent one thing, which is repentance by the ruling elite. And repentance isn't, it's not Christian repentance. It's not sitting there saying, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm really, really sorry, I'm really, really sorry, and I feel it very much. No, it means turning around and undoing all of the filth that they've been doing for the last 50 years. That's what it means, okay? It means actually turning around the policy. So there's that. The next thing that you can control is something you can do something about. And this brings me to my good friend Epictetus, the Roman philosopher, Stoic. I read a lot, and I'm a big fan of, look up Epictetus. He's got one book. The other half of it was lost. Is about focusing on what you can do. This isn't sort of some sort of like positive thinking kind of channel or anything like that. But if you focus on what you can do, suddenly you take back agency. And this is the problem with what's going on right now for a lot of people, myself included, is it's very difficult to kind of like claim agency in a situation where everything's closed down. I mean, it used to be that America, if you were being persecuted, and that's the correct word, we're being persecuted, right? Under persecution, you could go to America. America was the land of the free, the home of the brave. Well, not anymore, and not for a long time. That's all long gone. It's just, I've been to America. I went there just before this happened, in fact, and I could see. I've got a playlist. If you look it up, My America Journey or something like that. I've got 10 videos of different cities that I went to. I travelled right across the states, and in those videos, and this is pre what's going on now, I'm saying I can see that this is going to turn really nasty. You can see that this is a tyranny waiting to happen. I could just feel it. You could feel it, especially women. The women there, weaponized out of their minds. And you could see that these are really the agents of the state in this system. Really, 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 deluded and nasty females. Not all, but potentially, I'd say pretty much most. And it was even visible in the southern states. You expect it in New York, right? But I was in Texas, and you feel this, this nasty kind of, not exactly lesbian, but more kind of nasty, just waiting to hashtag you. Just wait. You can feel it. They're done. You can't help them. I'd hate to be in America looking for a wife. Good grief. Anyway, the next bit, got just 2 or 3 more points to go. You have to start, this is what I'm doing, by getting the system out of you. This big thing, again, I come from a Christian background, okay? All this stuff about, the Antichrist, and there's going to, when the mark of the beast and all this, and when that comes, then we're all going to suddenly become, like heroes. No, heroism, as I have learned, starts today. It starts with what you do today. Now, if I'd said that 3 or 4 years ago, I'd go, yeah, that's nice. I'd go back to the TV. But now, can you not see what's happening? They're coming after you. Look at what they're doing in Australia. Look at what they're doing in Australia and New Zealand. These were nice, safe countries that everyone wanted to go and live in. Look what they're doing there. And they're doing it because they love you so much. They're going to love you to death. To death. That's how it works. So you have to start with getting the system out of you before you can get out the system. So this idea that this is one solution, run away to the woods, or buy a caravan or whatever it is, if you've got a brain, you'll realize, they're going to cut down petrol. I'm not going to be able to drive. I'm going to this and this and this. They're going to take away properties, or putting people in camps. They're already doing it. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is reality. They're already doing it now. They're already rounding up children in various countries without their parents. This is happening in Australia right now. The guy selling this was saying, this is a great opportunity. You should. The Olympians take opportunities. You should take this opportunity with both hands. Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to completely ignore what you're saying and try and save my family. Anyway, start by getting the system out of you. I'm going to get to where we're going in a minute, but this is part of it, because I'm no different. I grew up in this. I didn't grow up as Grizzly Adams. I don't have a master's degree in bear wrestling. I've spent more time in the by the computer than I've spent in the countryside. Way more. What do I know? I don't know anything. So this can seem really huge, especially if you're like addicted to, or kind of like used to all this stuff, and see it as your baseline kind of requirements. But that's all going away. It really is going away. And, what you really need to do is compare with camps. That's the comparison. It's not comparing, a good Wi-Fi connection with a mosquito-ridden bog in the taiga somewhere. It's losing your family and being split up and sent into different camps where you're going to be processed, until you're no longer a problem. That's the comparison, right? So my last 2 points really is, and these are things that I've come to myself, and I know very few people are going to be listening at this point, so it's just basically you and me, right? So accept hardship. Our parents, or maybe not our parents, in fact not our parents if you're from the West, not my age, not my parents generation. They're the only generation I can think of that managed to escape any sort of real hardship, and yet they complain more than anybody you've ever met, don't they? It's incredible. But our grandparents, and great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents, they all suffered. They all had their war. Now, their war was just a function of what their ruling elite was telling them to do. Just like this one is. It's just different. See, before, there were them and us wars. And this kind of lasted as long as the so-called Cold War, which was, both ends of which were owned and still are owned by the same people. They didn't allow the removal of the Cold War until they'd created a new enemy. This enemy we're seeing, in Afghanistan and places like that, and all of these so-called terrorist organizations. They were created because they were creating a new war. This is the third generation war, because it used to be that enemies kind of fought each other in a straight line. The new war is a kind of a mixed up paste war where everyone, they've brought the enemy into your country. Now they could be the enemy. And now we're going to the next phase of war, which is everyone is the enemy. Everyone could have the invisible, imaginary thing that's such a danger, you see. And because you can't prove it, you can't prove you don't have it. It's not possible to prove this. You can't prove that you don't have it. Accusation, if you're accused of having the big V, then you have it. And if you don't comport, then you're a threat to other people, and therefore you can be got rid of. You see, that's how it works. So that's where we are. But this is a war. Okay, it's just like it's not just like any other war, but it's a war in the sense that it requires some kind of response from you. And in a way, this war is kind of better than all the other wars. And I'll tell you why I think this is a better war. Number one, you don't have to guess now who you're dealing with. They either took it or they didn't. If they did, they're done. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what the excuses. Everyone's got lots of excuses. I don't care about those. It means that they worship government. They're an idolater. That's it. It doesn't matter what else they say. They're family. I've got family members, people I love very much, but they've shown by their actions who they are. Now we know. There we are. Okay. That they will claim they have the science. They have science. There is no science. How can you claim that over something that hasn't even been through proper trials and people are clearly dropping dead from. It doesn't matter. They've done things with, not experiments, but they know this about sheep. Sheep will continue to graze even as they're dying. There's no point at which these people are going to turn around and say, you know what, you were right. In my case, in my family, they will actually admit that they are living in a tyranny. They do get that much. But they still think, it's bizarre, they still think that the people who create the tyranny want the best for them. You can't help them. This is what I call siloed thinking. It's all compartmentalized into one area, and they can't join the dots. And if you try to show them how it's joined, you're just a conspiracy theorist. But they're the ones sitting at home. My mother is not able to see any members of her family. Well, she wasn't until very recently. Hadn't been out of the house, properly for 2 years or whatever it was. But I'm the conspiracy theorist. Can't help them. The fact that you love them just makes it worse. So accept that it's hardship. And the last point leading into my conclusion is that now we need to learn. Again, it's not just about having a place in the country. Got my guns, I got my beans, I got my King James Bible. Nice if you got it. Good for you. That's a good start. But the black helicopters can always take that all away, all right? They just can, Ruby Ridge, all right? So that isn't going to save you. If you can get it, great. But treat this as a learning curve, firstly. And secondly, what we're going to do is, I'm just sort of kind of bringing together the strands of what I've been talking about up to this point is, of course, if you can survive, great. But don't fear death. They fear death. It's the unbelievers who fear death. And they've got everything to fear. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's God. The believers, they put their trust in God. That doesn't mean do nothing. Do something. But don't let them, make you run around like a chicken with its head cut off. So what we're doing, this is one stage for us. Like you, I'm a computer guy. I've spent the last 20, 25 years. I've spent all my working life working either with computers or close to computers. I'm not a programmer. I'm more kind of like, I've done more sort of almost sort of like PR stuff and all the rest of it. But computers have been a major part of my life and everyone else's life, I'm sure. But really, to stand any chance of surviving, we have to decompress from the 21st century. And if you think about it, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, all of this has just happened in 120 years. 120 years ago, we were all on the land. 120 years ago, well, maybe not 120 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, but even in America, 120 years ago, most people are on the land. Now, no one's on the land. That's how they get you. We're all in the mousetrap. They got us into the mousetrap, and that's the cities. How easy is it going to be to learn, to relearn all of those 18th century skills? Well, I don't believe I can learn them all in 5 minutes. But what we're going to do is we're going to rent what we're looking for is to rent a very simple kind of place out in the countryside for a couple of months to learn. I can't see even if we could afford to, I can't see the point of buying anywhere. It doesn't seem to be the main thing. What we really need is skills, and to stop fearing this, because it's the fear of, what am I going to do if I haven't got a really good internet connection? Well, you lived without a really good internet connection or any internet connection up until whenever it was, 1990, I can't remember when it was. We've only had mobile telephones for 20, 25 years. We lived without all of this stuff. It's not difficult, but you do have to kind of decompress from this. So that's what we're going to try to do. I don't know where we're going to go. We're starting to look now, because since I finished the work, God protocol and the rest of it, frankly, I needed to take a bit of a break. I knew we had to do something different, but I wasn't really sure on what it was. But this is kind of like a basic sketch of what it is. I'm not saying it should be the same for you, but I am saying that flee to God, get this system out of you first, and learn now to put your trust in God, because that's where this is going, okay? One way or another, you're going to have to do it. And so you may as well start now. It's a skill set. You have to practice it. And, saying, oh, well, I trust God, but as long as I got my job, well, I learned that one 7 or 8 years ago. I committed career suicide, and we've survived, and I did the work that was really the central plank of my life, and I'm just only grateful. I'm only grateful for it. So what next? Well, let's carry on trusting God. But trusting God isn't a nothing thing. It's an active thing. It's not sitting there going, inshallah. Well, I mean, say inshallah if you really must, but it's an active thing. So for us, I'm going to try to demystify all of this, try to remove some of the fear of it, of being outside the system, by just going and learning. Just spend a couple of months, living like that, and then we'll learn something and then see what we can do next. One thing is for sure, I don't want to be trapped in the cities. I mean, just so you know, Russia, we've got elections, I mean, if you believe in democracy, nice for you and everything. I don't have any feelings about it one way or another. But they have, this process coming up in the middle of September. So where we live, it's not in Moscow, it's in another nicer city, in my opinion. Things are fine at the moment, pretty relaxed. I mean, you've got the kind of people walking around with those sort of, I call them blue beards, but it's going to get really nasty, and you can see that it is. And the legal system is being put in place, so they can actually just take your place of residence, they just have to declare that there's an emergency, or actually that they suspect that there's an emergency, and they can just basically, whole cities, they can just get rid of everybody. They can just make you leave. And as far as I understand it, you're not allowed to lock your house or your flat behind you. You have to leave it open. So basically you're going to own nothing. Children and parents are going to be split up. All the stuff they're trialling in Australia now and various other places is coming. There's no question about it. So I don't know exactly when, but I do know I don't want to be sitting in it. If we have to stay here, okay, we'll stay. We'll trust God the best we can. But I'm certainly going to look at some alternatives. And what I've tried to do, and what I'm trying to sort of get to in this talk, is to try to kind of split it up into bits. There's trusting God, there's one bit. There's decompressing from what we've been used to is another bit. Excuse me. There's learning some of the basic 18th century skills, that's another bit. There's overcoming the fear of being kind of like separated from the hive mind, that's another bit. So rather, there's, inability to make any real planning. How can you plan for a rogue tyranny? How can you plan for that? Well, you can't plan for that. But what you can do is accept that that's what you're in. That's the nature of the war that you're fighting, and accept it on those terms, rather than seeing it as some kind of aberration in the universe that you may not be able to get the kind of cappuccino that you're used to buying. That's, what you have to do is cut it up like a salami, not try to eat the whole thing in one go, and start to kind of take bits off it so that you can optimize your chances for surviving as a believer. I don't believe that surviving on every is always good. Most people, they just want to survive so they can go back to their old life. Well, your old life wasn't yours. They owned that like they own this. Okay, that's how it was. For me, I want to go to God with a sincere heart. I don't want to go to hell. I've seen enough of it. I don't like it. This is our test. This is our war. Let's accept it as warriors and do what we can do. But if you have to die, make sure you do it on your feet and not on your knees. And you see what people are doing, complying their way out of this, trying to. They're still dying. And they're going to hell, in my opinion, because they have turned away from the only true source of power and protection. Well, I don't want to do that. I see what people are doing. They're being forced to choose. This is Qur'an in the Arabic, in the Quranic term. It's a criterion. It's a division. Be clear on which side you stand. And if you stand on that side, enjoy it for what you can get. But, accept that there's a price to be paid. There's a price to be paid anywhere. Anyway, pay it. Be happy with your choice and accept the discipline, because this is what it is. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. That's all I've got to say on this subject. I hope the ends of this talk make sense, and I wish everyone all the very best. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an and all other work free using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.